Welcome to the 700 Club. For today's top headlines, let's go over to the CBN News desk.
Gordon rescue workers face stormy conditions as they work around the clock searching for survivors at the site of the condominium collapse in Surfside, Florida. 28 victims were confirmed dead by late Monday. Mark Martin has the story.
The search for survivors in the Surfside condo collapse presses on, even as Tropical Storm Elsa nears Florida. First responders only stop for lightning. They comb through the rubble despite strong winds and heavy rain.
I'm in awe of the men and women of the USAR task force teams who've been continuing to brave dangerous and changing conditions.
One member of the Israeli Defense Forces search and rescue team said people in the area gave them a lot of goodwill and love.
We work around the clock 24/7 in changing weather. And look at these people and feel that our action influence their mood and the way they see that we are willing to do everything to save the trap.
The mayor of Surfside says the search is going at 100% capacity. Rescuers can now get to those areas that were too risky before. Demolishing the remaining part of Champlain Towers South freed crews to access those parts.
The heavy equipment is now able to move around the site as needed. The looming threat of that building, the dangerous situation where debris could fall down is now eliminated.
That news encourages officials and families who are holding out hope for the more than 100 people still missing. So far, nearly 30 victims are now confirmed dead.
What's driving us right now is hope. The hope that the family has of us being successful in finding their loved ones.
64-year-old Ileana Montegudo is a survivor of the building collapse, barely escaping.
I lost everything. I lost everything. Don't forget the people that survive. We have to start again our life from zero.
Officials say they have removed nearly 5 million pounds of concrete from the area where the building collapsed. The latest forecast showed Tropical Storm Elsa mostly sparing South Florida, where the search is going on, but another day of unsettled weather is anticipated. Mark Martin, CBN News.
With a number of new cases from COVID-19 dropping, even with concerns over the Delta variant, life is getting back to normal in the U.S. And according to Dr. Mary McCary, a professor at Johns Hopkins University, a major reason is natural immunity. CBN's Jenna Browder brings us the details.
You've possibly seen Dr. Marty McCary on TV or read one of his newspaper articles. He makes the case that many experts have been wrong and why it's time for all of us to get back to normal life.
Now the pandemic is really over.
This from one of the medical field's most respected voices, Dr. Marty McCary, professor at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health.
The number of daily cases of COVID are 1/50th the number of daily cases of flu in the middle of a mild flu season.
Dr. McCary talks about it all in his book, The Price We Pay, What Broke American Healthcare and How to Fix It. He says there's a lot the medical establishment and those like Dr. Anthony Fauci got wrong.
And one important thing as a leader in the medical field or anywhere is humility. We didn't see that. He got so many things wrong, and we all make mistakes, but the principal job of that position is to warn us of a pandemic and tell us how to manage it. We didn't get the warnings, and then once it happened, I wrote the first article calling for universal masking in the New York Times. Why didn't we hear that from our medical leadership? That was something where I think it would be helpful for him to say, I got it wrong.
He says medical experts also got it wrong with natural immunity and highlights why in his latest Wall Street Journal op-ed.
It's one of the biggest failures of our medical establishment to dismiss natural immunity. It's about half the country. And if you have it, it turns out the data has come out with 2 big studies showing that it works, it's durable, you may not need the vaccine, and it's probably long-lasting. It's probably lifelong. So when you dismiss natural immunity, you see only 63% of adults in America are vaccinated. The road to get to 85% is a dire situation. It requires mandates and kids getting vaccinated and demonizing those who are hesitant. But recognizing that half of the unvaccinated have natural immunity, it explains why we're at herd immunities now and cases are plummeting.
On the China lab leak theory,
there are a lot of data points here that suggest the story is very plausible.
Dr. McCary was one of few to give it any credence last spring.
If you think about the consequences here, this is the largest liability or malpractice case in the history of the world. So people have a right to get more answers, and we're not going to get it from a full investigation. Be careful when you hear politicians posturing for a full investigation. We have all the data we're going to get right now, and the conclusion is very obvious.
Another obvious conclusion, he says, it's time to put this all behind us.
We need to move on. We need to reestablish a human connection. We've got to address the effects of profound loneliness and rebuild communities.
And to that point, Dr. McCary says he's also against calls to oust Dr. Fauci. He says we shouldn't be going after individuals like that, but instead moving forward. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Israel's new government is pressing ahead with building international relationships. One of the key countries is the United Arab Emirates, part of the Abraham Accords agreement signed with Israel last year. And last week, a top Israeli official visited the UAE on an important diplomatic mission. CBN's Julie Stahl brings us that story.
New Foreign Minister Yair Lapid is the highest-ranking Israeli official to visit the United Arab Emirates since the signing of last year's peace agreement.
This is an historic moment, and it is a reminder that history is created by people who understand history but are willing to change it, people who prefer the future to the past.
In the capital of Abu Dhabi, Lapid dedicated the Israeli embassy in a ceremony that included Jewish prayers and placing a mezuzah on the doorpost.
Israel wants peace with all its neighbors. We aren't going anywhere. The Middle East is our home, and we are here to stay. So we call on all the countries of the region to recognize that and to come to talk to us.
Lapid also thanked leaders responsible for bringing the Abraham Accords to fruition, the first peace agreement between Israel and Arab nations in more than 25 years.
To Israel's former Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who was the architect of the Abraham Accords and who worked tirelessly to bring them about. I want to thank former U.S. President Donald Trump.
Since the agreement's signing, Israel has established several $100 million worth of trade agreements with the UAE, and more than 200,000 Israeli tourists have visited there. Lapid also opened a consulate in the Emirate of Dubai.
It's a place of life, of tourism, of business, of dialogue between two talented peoples who can and who want to contribute to one another.
Ambassador Eitan Naeh, head of mission at the Israeli embassy in Abu Dhabi, told CBN News the Abraham Accords opened the way for a different future.
I think the Abraham Accords, first of all, are a dream and then a vision, and now we are down to realizing it, materializing it, and really rolling up our sleeves and starting the hard work of making it happen, creating a new model of peace and normalization in the Middle East, where cooperation is the key word.
Naeh said it doesn't mean there won't be challenges, but there's a strategic decision to build normal relations.
Within a few weeks, we will sign quite a few more agreements to really cement the cooperation and the relationships to show peoples and governments in the region what the true close relationships look like.
Naeh said they want other countries in the Middle East to ask themselves, why not us too? Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Back here at home, critics have long said major media has a liberal bias, and now they argue social media does as well. David Brody brings us this look at those criticisms and how conservatives are responding.
We may no longer see Donald Trump in front of cameras or feel the impact of his late-night tweets, but his infamous label fake news lives on as much as ever before.
This is a news media that will look you in the face and say that they are a news media. They're nothing of the sort any longer. They are unquestionably the megaphones for the far left in America today.
When Trump departed, he left a gift of inflated exposure and better ratings to a number of conservative media outlets, including Newsmax and One America News. Meanwhile, Fox News only got lumps of coal from the outgoing president.
Fox has become fake news, too. I don't know what happened.
While Fox remains the major conservative voice, things have changed since the events of January 6th, especially when it comes to staying away from so-called flamethrowers, like U.S. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene.
What's been your experience there? I look for you there. I don't see you there often, if at all. I don't know. I don't track it totally. But what's your experience there with Fox?
Well, if you notice, David, I'm one of the most conservative members of Congress, and I'm never invited to be on Fox News.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone knows that Fox News changed drastically after the election. Republicans all over the country constantly talk about how Fox has changed, and they don't see it the same as they used to.
The Georgia Congresswoman seems to be part of a growing distrust of the media. Recent polls shows that of those who voted for President Trump, 92% of them see the media today as just a part of the Democratic Party. Another poll shows since January 6th, that feeling among Republicans has increased even more, up some 7%. Washington Post media reporter Paul Farhi says the Trump faithful have totally tuned out the mainstream media over issues such as coverage of election integrity issues during the 2020 election. And even his answer is somewhat telling.
In some ways, David, it's hard to argue with the faithful and the belief of the faithful. The facts don't seem to really matter, and the evidence doesn't seem to matter.
So where do Trump conservatives go? Some are looking to alternative outlets, which have refused to back away from charges about a rigged election. At first, social media served as a way to get around the mainstream influence, although with Twitter and Facebook leading the censorship charge, it's becoming trickier, and options to fully speak out have become limited.
Obviously, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, there are a lot of social media outlets that have proven to suppress the voices of conservatives. And so I think that we have all felt like, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if there was a platform available that would allow us to say what we want? Oh, my gosh, the First Amendment. Imagine that, our freedom of speech not being stifled.
This next phase will be fought primarily online as a battle against big tech censorship.
There's a lot of fear out there of if we can't talk to each other and we can't express our opinions, how are we ever going to mount a great challenge for the midterms or to take back the White House? It's a very helpless feeling.
Tommy Lahren and other conservatives say the key will be multitasking, staying engaged on Twitter and other platforms, despite big tech's roving eye, while also looking for new viable conservative alternatives in this new media landscape.
A lot of folks I know are boycotting Twitter. They don't want to be on it, and it's understandable. But for me, I'm not going to give up an inch of a place that I still have a voice. So I'm going to keep talking for as long as I can until they deplatform me. The same thing goes with Facebook and Instagram. So unfortunately, it's kind of the best option we have right now is to just keep it up for as long as we can until we no longer have a voice on those platforms. And then we're going to have to get creative.
It's the reality millions of conservatives and voters live in today. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.